Hello and welcome to this review of my IBM 3278 display station. Finally, I tackle a beam spring. This one is on loan to me from Andy, thanks again mate, and it's in spectacularly good condition. It's a really late one from 1984. Most of these beam spring keyboards are from the 70s, and perhaps the fact that it's such a late one has contributed to how well it's been preserved. The containment shield, which is a thin membrane that IBM put under the keycaps to protect the switches, has been taken off. It's not really needed anyway. And there's some small scuff marks on these dividers here that you can see. But other than that, it looks pretty much almost like new, actually. The caps have no shine on them and they're still ridiculously white. The metal mounting plate, which is one of those cobalt-plated rainbow jobbies, doesn't appear to have much, if any, rust on it at all. It even has the original troubleshooting guide below this spring-loaded hatch here. Look at that. How cool is that? That's just awesome. It also has the original maintenance library for it. This tray is normally located under the keyboard, but unfortunately one of the clips seems to have broken off. It's very complicated, has a huge amount of stuff in it. Fuck me, look at all that. Amazingly, Andy converted this to USB using this slide-on CapSense controller designed by Tom Wong Cornell, aka XWhatsit. So, using this magic trickery, I can use this wonderful old keyboard over USB. This particular model, the 3278, comes from a display station, basically a kind of computer terminal thing. It predates the notion of personal computers, so we're talking some properly ancient stuff here, all the more of a miracle someone adapted it to USB. This model is one of the smaller beam spring keyboards out there. In fact, it's only a hair longer than the Dell Bigfoot. There were models that were even smaller. I think the smallest one had only a single row here, and it didn't have this PF cluster here at all. But still, it's pretty conservative for something this old. Of course, by necessity of the mechanism, it is a lot taller. In fact, at its highest point, it's about 9 centimeters off the top of your desk. Right, let's start with the construction. Basically, it's a block of near solid steel. The entire outer case is made out of metal, as much as 2.3 millimeters thick at the top, and simply fucking massive at the bottom. The keyboard sits in this huge metal pan at the bottom, and the bottom of the keyboard itself is also metal. Look at that, looks absolutely gorgeous. And then the top plate is also metal. Unsurprisingly, all this metal results in a ridiculous weight, 4.8 kilograms. That's almost a kilo more than the Battleship, and that keyboard is much bigger too. That makes this beam spring by far the heaviest keyboard I have, the only one heavier than the Battleship. It's unbelievable. You just have to try it for yourself before you believe it. So yeah, as I'm sure you can imagine, these things are structurally almost invulnerable. One thing that's known to plague these, because of the age obviously, is rust spots. Some are badly rusted, but because of how thick the plates are, you can just sand that down or de-rust it, and you should be good to go. It uses these rubber pillars as feet. They're non-adjustable, but I doubt anyone would want to raise this thing up even higher than it already is anyway. And finally, here is the one date stamp and the whole keyboard showing it, or at least the case, was made on August 23rd, 1984. Now onto the switches, the remarkable beam springs. There are many keyboard enthusiasts out there, and some of them have heard of or even tried the legendary IBM Model M with its buckling spring switches. These are fantastic switches, one of the best switches ever made, and many who give these a try consider them the best in the world. But some of those, an even smaller group, know that there is an older model, the Model F, with a capacitive version of these buckling springs. And those lucky enough to try them out almost invariably consider them to be much better than the Model M. The mechanisms are very closely related, but the Model F feels smoother, crisper, and just better in every way. It's a spectacularly good switch. And then there is an even smaller group, a very lucky, very few who have tried beam springs, the switches that came before even the capacitive buckling springs in the Model F. Again, almost all of these people consider them better yet even than the amazing capacitive buckling springs. And so do I. Trying them side by side, they make the Model F feel almost clumsy and lumpen. There is no doubt in my mind, these are the best feeling switches I've ever tried. No contest, none whatsoever. Thing is though, unlike the Model M and the Model F, the switches in these have very different construction. Beam spring switches were invented and patented in 1971 by Richard Hunter Harris, the same man who also patented the later buckling springs. Like the early buckling spring models, beam springs are capacitive, but apart from that, the similarities quickly end. Instead of a flipper that's pressed down on a capacitive PCB when a coil spring buckles, like with buckling springs, beam springs have a fly plate which are on the PCB by default and are lifted off it when the beam spring collapses, which pulls the fly plate off. So these don't use coil springs at all, and they work the other way around. There are also discrete switches and apparently IBM sold replacement modules to service your board with, while buckling springs are just flippers held in a barrel plate. It's a very, very expensive design, and the sensing assembly was somewhat vulnerable to dirt and dust, which is why they later replaced it with the much cheaper, simpler, and less dust-sensitive buckling springs in the Model F. Yeah, that's right, it's hard to believe, but the Model F was the cheap option at the time. Hilariously, it's also even louder. Back then, people were used to typewriters, and this level of noise, which nowadays would be considered unthinkably loud, was considered almost silent back then. So they put a solenoid in here to make a noise every time you press a key, to make it a bit louder. And the result is quite dramatic. Let's compare three noises here really quickly. A rubber dome keyboard, a Model F, and the beam spring. Ready? Right, here we go. It's loud beyond imagination. I can't even understand videos anymore while I type on this. But what a sound! The function keys don't trigger the clicker, so here is what they sound naturally compared to what they sound like with the clicker on. All that said, beam springs have their own limitations, which buckling springs don't have. First of all, like I said, they're sensitive to contamination of the sensing assembly. This is rarely a problem on the Model F. And second, because it was from a time in which many or even most people still used electronic typewriters, there is a limit to how quickly it can register successive key presses. So if I press a key really quickly, it will disregard most of those key presses. You will not hear the solenoid trigger a lot of the time. Here, let me show you. See, it only goes off a few times if you do that. And this results in certain words always going wrong. For example, definitely, there, and generally, among many others. I'll show you what I mean. Let me type the word there a few times. And the result of that is this. See, the second E is always missing because it was typed too quickly. And this happens without flaw. So because of this limitation, typing on this keyboard goes a bit slower. You can even hear it trying to catch up if you press your hands on the keyboard like this. Sounds like a sewing machine, isn't that hilarious? It's also horrendous for gaming. Of course, this thing wasn't even designed with gaming in mind, and normally I don't mind too much what keyboard I game on. It doesn't make too big a difference in general, I think. But because it disregards quick key presses, a lot of things go wrong in-game. For example, diagonal movement tends to lag behind, and because the switch is sluggish to release again, it's extremely hard to make fine movements or adjustments. Also, the unusual layout of the nav cluster with a block nav can be pretty bad as well. I tried playing some old DOS games with these arrow keys, and the best way I can describe the result is cataclysmic failure. The fact that it's got inherent N-key rollover isn't even enough to salvage this, so I really wouldn't recommend it for gaming at all. For typing, though, I can't really think of anything that even comes close, as long as you don't type too fast. The keycaps are massive chunks of ABS with beautiful double shot lettering. It's bold and sharp, and because it's double shots, it will never wear off. Many of the keycaps have extra pad printed legends on the front as well, but on some keycaps they have worn off a little bit, unfortunately. Apparently that's due to washing or something. The lettering is right in the middle because they have deep spherical tops, especially the F and J keys, which is basically what they used as homing bumps before those became common. Being a terminal keyboard, some of the caps have funny legends, and because I have the booklet, I can finally figure out what they mean for once. For example, this little icon means print. Never have guessed that. This thing here is for turning the clicker off, although it doesn't have that function anymore. And as I guessed in another video, these ones mean insert and delete respectively. They're really cool icons. I wish keyboards would still use these. Now, apart from the horrible block nav here, the layout is actually pretty modern. With some rebinding, you can make these into F keys. You can make that control, that alt. This becomes a simple nav cluster. And you can turn these into a numpad. And they put this special keycap, which is actually a cherry cap more or less jammed into the switch here, for use as an FN key, so you can use function layers. For the HHKB enthusiasts, you can even have the backspace in this awkward place where the backtab key is. So what do I think of it? Well, as I said, it has some limitations. It will not keep up with your typing, and it's terrible for gaming. But really, does that matter all that much? Look what you're getting in return. Build quality better than anything I've ever seen, some of the best keycaps ever put on a keyboard, and switches with no equal, young or old. What a keyboard. What a masterpiece. Well, I guess you want to see it in action now, right? This time you're getting 2 typing demonstrations. First, one with the clicker off. Then, after that, one with the clicker on. Have fun and see you next time.